welcome to an introduction to generative artificial intelligence. How does it work and how might it impact my work as a teacher? Facilitated by Moses Valesco from OTF staff. We'll begin with the OTF land acknowledgement. We acknowledge first and foremost that we are gathered in the province of Ontario on the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples who have been present on this land known as Turtle Island since time immemorial. We acknowledge that this has been a meeting ground for generations. We are grateful to the stewards and caretakers of this land. As advocates, teachers, and educators, we understand our collective responsibility to honor, protect, and sustain this land. We further recognize and honor, within the membership of OTF, those who are Indigenous to this land. This practice of recognizing the ancestral and traditional lands in which we work, live, and play is a concrete action that we undertake as a first step towards reconciliation between Canadians and the Indigenous peoples of this land. But it is not our only step. Collectively and individually, we must seek to denounce the injustices and the wrongs that have been committed against the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and to dedicate ourselves to cultivating and maintaining relationships based on mutual respect and truth. At this point, I welcome Moses Valesco. Moses, I will stop sharing my screen so that you can do so.
Great. Thank you so much, Kalpana. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this webinar, an introduction to generative artificial intelligence. I thought maybe I could begin by just telling you a little bit about myself and how it is that I find myself, that I am here in front of you, talking a little about generative AI. So I recently joined the Ontario Teachers Federation this past March. But I have a history of being a classroom teacher and then being a consultant in the school board that I worked in. Had a little bit of a had some time actually at the Ministry of Education as an education officer, looking at how we can support with policy implementation. And then from there, I actually moved to the Ontario Science Centre, where I was the director of learning programs. And now I am with the Ontario Teachers Federation as the Director of Curriculum and Assessment. And one of the things that I have to do as a staff member at OTF is be aware of some of the most current issues and trends that we face, and we face in K-12 education here in the province. And so generative AI is something that has certainly bubbled up as a topic of interest. And so I've been doing quite a bit of my own kind of study into what artificial intelligence is and this specific thing called generative artificial intelligence. And we thought there might be an opportunity for me to share a little bit about what I've learned, in the hopes to ensure that we all understand what generative AI is, some of the wonderful things that might come with it, and then some things that really we need to take pause with as we consider how it might be used in our schools. So I don't want to presume that everyone has had an opportunity to see generative AI in action. So what I have here is a student task prompt. So when we use generative AI, in very natural language, we give the model a prompt, create this. And so this task that I have here is write a 5-paragraph essay that compares and contrasts A Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood with current political issues affecting women in Canada. Provide specific quotes from the book and relevant media headlines to defend positions taken in the essay. So what I'd like to do is I'm actually going to bring Kalpana, you're just going to have to confirm for me. Are you seeing Copilot?
I am.
On my screen? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to take that prompt, and you can see here, Copilot is a generative AI model that is part of the Microsoft environment. And so this is actually part of what I have in terms of the suite at work. And so here are different questions or things that I could ask Copilot. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to the Ask Me Anything box, and I'm going to paste that prompt that I just read to you. And I want you to note a few things. I want you to note how quickly this generates a 5-paragraph essay. And we'll just kind of scan through it, and I want you to just look at how it has written what it has written, okay? So first thing, look how quickly this, or how slowly maybe, this generates.
Wondering if you're able to zoom in a little bit on your screen so it's easier for us to see.
Yeah, let me see if I can do that. So here is,
Much
I want
better. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So you can see here, this is it wrote the essay, and it did what I asked. So I can see quotes here that it has provided. It also highlights recent data that has been surfaced around issues that women are facing in Canada. Gives very specific references to occurrences or characters in the book. And so, yeah, it just did this really quickly. Now, what's interesting here is it also gives me citations of where it actually got information and how it used that information to create what it did. So that is one example of what Copilot can do from a student's perspective. The second thing I want to show you is a prompt from a teacher. So maybe what I'll do is, so now that I've zoomed in, this is the prompt that I have that a teacher might ask. And it is this: write a lesson plan with these two learning expectations. For those of you teaching grade 5 and 6, these might be familiar to you. Read, represent, compare, and order decimal numbers up to hundreds in various contexts, and round decimal numbers, both terminating and repeating to the nearest tenth, hundredth, or whole number as applicable in various contexts. I then asked it to use the following task: adapt the clothesline number line to focus on rounding decimals. Use a clothesline with the cards 5 and 6 pinned at opposite ends. Support students in subdividing and labeling the space by tenths, 5.1, 5.2, etc. And I've also instructed Copilot here to make sure that there is small group learning for students, that the lesson plan should include misconceptions that students may have with these learning expectations that a teacher might need to be mindful of when they're assessing students. So here, let's take a look and see how quickly it generates a lesson plan. So we can see here that it's a very typical lesson plan here. You know, I'm certain that in your experiences when you review with the faculty or when you've seen resources that have been developed, we typically start lesson plans with learning expectations, the materials you're going to need, and then, you know, your introduction, your mind's on, maybe there's a whole group experience, then going into small groups, group discussion, kind of consolidation, and then independent practice, right? And then a closing. It did include the misconceptions for me to look out for as a teacher while I'm looking at student work throughout their work. Now, I could actually go in and be a little more critical here of the math that's actually happening. But you can see, what I want you to see is how quickly the Copilot was able to generate this lesson plan. What I'm going to suggest to you is that this would be a very interesting place to begin as a teacher, to think about how it explains how to use the clothesline activity. Now, admittedly, I did get this clothesline activity from the curriculum itself. So on the curriculum website, when you click on a specific expectation, there's teacher prompts. And so there's examples, there are key ideas, and they also have some sample tasks. So I actually fed in a very public teaching prompt into Copilot. So I want you to note that everything that I've put in here so far has been public facing. I haven't put any kind of private information in here. Not, everything is publicly available that I have asked it asked of it to generate.
Moses,
But yeah.
we have a question in the chat. Is Copilot free on the internet?
Do you know, I think it is. I think you have to have a Microsoft account. I don't, and we'll get to why we need to be aware of when we use free accounts and what that means. Hopefully that'll become a little bit clearer to you, but Yeah, so I just wanted you to all see how Copilot, as an example of generative AI, creates what it does using some authentic examples. Um, when we do this kind of work, sometimes it is uh, we can take for granted that people have had experiences with it and they may not have. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all kind of on the same page there. So here is that lesson plan writing prompt that I just shared with you. But let's continue. So when we think about generative AI, we typically will think about like a task, a question that we might pose to it, and we feed it into this AI, right? And it creates, typically generative AI will create three different things. It can create text, it can create music, it could create images. And what we understand is that this is all created. It's new. It's original. It's not a copy of things. It has taken data and processed it and then created something. Now the thing is with generative AI, it's a bit of a black box. Many of us, and I think this is typical with a lot of technology, we just start using it. We don't necessarily know how it works. We just know how to use it and we know what it will produce. And with that kind of frame, that is often how we will approach generative AI and how we use it. And so we want to spend some time this afternoon looking at this black box and opening it up. Let's find out really what's going on behind the black box, inside that black box. And the reason I'd like to spend some time doing that is so that you have an awareness of how it functions so that you can make wise decisions about how you will use it in your practice and or how you might get students to use it with their learning. So that said, let's define some terms here, okay? So artificial intelligence, it is a broad term. It's a broad field of study. It refers to the creation of machines or software that have the capability of imitating intelligent human behavior. So when we think about machines or software that can imitate intelligent human behavior, we're talking about artificial intelligence. So some examples of human behavior that we're referring to here are understanding language, recognizing images, making decisions. We can do that with our intellect. And so programming machines to do that as well, it means that it's artificial intelligence. Now, within artificial intelligence, we have this field called machine learning. And so within artificial intelligence, machine learning is specifically creating algorithms. So processes like pathways, if you will, ways of learning from data and then allowing these programs or these machines to improve their own practice over time. So without human beings coming in and explicitly programming, the machine learning is a way for artificial intelligence to actually improve its own performance without relying on a human being to do actually that programming. Now, within machine learning, so we talked about artificial intelligence being that broader field. Within there, we have machine learning. We have something called neural networks. And so a neural network is a way that the machine learning processes data and it is inspired by, it mimics how human brains work, specifically recognizing patterns. So when we hear about artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and typically it's the neural networks that is what really makes the products that generative AI creates impressive, because it is based so much on the way that human beings, their brains work and recognize patterns. So generative AI then rests within machine learning, within artificial intelligence, but it specifically uses neural networks to create new content like images or text or music. It learns from patterns from existing data, and then it generates new similar data. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure that I captured everything I wanted to say. Neural or generative AI does use advanced learning models machine learning models, like something called deep learning. Sometimes you might hear that term as well, mixed in with all these other terms, but deep learning is another one. And large language models. Those are other terms that you might hear wrapped up in there. But based on the kind of reading that I've been doing, I think that this is probably the simplest way to understand how generative AI sits within artificial intelligence, how machine learning is a part of artificial intelligence, and neural networks is a way of processing data. It's where computers are programmed to mimic how human brains work. So, I mean, that's a very high-level explanation of these terms. And what I thought I would do was actually ask Copilot to help me explain this to you as if you were 10-year-olds. Like if I was going to explain this to a 10-year-old, how could I do that? Well, Copilot, when I asked it that, this is what it gave me. It gave me the analogy of a school. And it said, imagine artificial intelligence is an entire school, and it's got different classes and it's got different activities. Within that school, we have a special class, and it's called Learning Club. And in this class, special class students, they're learning new things, and they're doing it by practicing and getting better over time. So that would be, in this analogy, what machine learning is like. Now, again, we have machine learning, and then the next one is neural networks. But in this learning club, there's groups of students that are working on a project. Each student has a different job, but they work together. And so very much like a neural network, we can think of this group of kids having their respective roles, but working together. And generative AI then specifically is in that learning club. The students create new content like text or images. And so I do find it interesting playing with generative AI and models like Copilot, thinking about how to explain things in a different way. And that has been very interesting to me to get that. Now, again, I'm using Copilot, this generative AI, but how does it actually work? So what I'm wondering though is maybe we can do a reflection based on some of the things that I shared about these terms. Maybe I'll go back here. What are some questions or insights you might have about these four things before I proceed and we can actually get into a little bit of how it's really working, what's inside that box? Kalpan, are there questions in the chat that might be helpful?
They are questions in the chat. They're not directly related to this slide. So maybe I'll ask them and you can see if they fit in. So the first one
Sure.
is Copilot any different from ChatGPT or more recent?
So what's interesting is they are owned by different. So ChatGPT is and Copilot are both what we call large language models. So just think of them as they basically have the same function, but they do basically belong to different corporations. That's basically it. It's like the way I think about it, it's a lot like Coke and Pepsi. They're both colas, but they're two different companies.
Okay.
So yeah.
The next question was, I've heard that the College of Teachers is weighing in. If AI is used, if AI generated material too much, do you have any information on that? So I guess the College of Teachers is concerned about the amount that AI is being used.
Oh, okay. I'm not aware of that. I haven't been made aware of anything there, but my colleague, Lindy, is here. Maybe Lindy, thanks.
Yeah, just to say that at the current time, there's nothing that the college is saying about the use of AI. At some point, of course, they will put out some kind of a, wow, I've lost the name of it, where they give
Advisory?
Advisory?
An advisory. Thank you very much, Kalpan. An advisory, members, a professional advisory giving guidelines of what is and is not okay. But at this point, they wouldn't even know what to say, because a lot of people are just starting to explore and to understand what the power and the capacity of generative AI is. What I would say to anybody is that you should definitely consult with your school board and with your local union, just to see if your school board has any guidelines about how they're allowing students to use generative AI, and or how they're either encouraging or not encouraging teachers to use AI. So those are the two places that for now you should be consulting, just to make sure that you understand your school board's policies. Some school boards are quite advanced in this and have developed some beginning policies. Others have not yet done so, but you need to find out before you do anything.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Lindy. Yeah.
Moses, your next question is, are there any thoughts on preventing its use in set applications?
Sorry, what applications?
Set applications.
In set applications. Not sure what that means.
Would the person who put it in the chat, would you like to elaborate a little?
Yeah, I just meant specific applications. Like if I ask my students to do something, can I, I'm interested in preventing the use. I don't want them giving me the Margaret Atwood essay that AI generated.
Yeah, so we're going to visit that question later on in the presentation, because what I'd like for us to do is make sure that we have an understanding of how it works. I think that when we understand how it works, we can be more, I'll use the word judicious about how we will get students to use it, if that's something that we decide that we want to do. But thank you for that question, Dean. I'm hoping that we'll be able to answer that. Kalpana, is it fair that maybe if I continue through this, maybe some of the questions might be resolved if I go through the content a little bit first?
Absolutely. I'm
Okay.
reading through them, and I think your presentation covers a lot of them.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let me just continue here. So let's just review. Artificial intelligence is when computers are programmed to do things that usually need human intelligence. GenAI, or generative AI, is a type of artificial intelligence that creates new content like text, images, or music based on what it's learned from existing data. And so neural networks is the way that generative AI has been programmed to be able to create what it does. Okay, so yeah. Let's talk now about how does it learn? How does it get trained to be able to create what it does? Well, in the world of computer science, and I can't get too technical here because this is not really, I haven't done deep academic formal study in this, but what I have come to understand is the way that generative AI learns are in two ways. And these are ways that we would typically train computers or programming, and that is through supervised learning and through unsupervised learning. So supervised learning and unsupervised learning is what programmers do with the AI, right, or with the model. So supervised learning is when the AI model is given data, but the data is labeled. And so the model, the AI model, is told what the data is that it is being fed, and then the model is also told, with this data, this is what you should do. That is supervised learning. So the programmer in supervised learning, they label the data, then they put it into the model. Then we have something called unsupervised data, where it's learning from unlabeled data. So the model is getting like a huge host of data, but none of it is labeled. It isn't told what these things are. In fact, the model now can analyze patterns, structures in the data, relationships in the data, to understand the context and then to create new content. So the two ways that we typically think about learning or machine learning is through supervised learning and unsupervised learning. I again thought, well, how could I explain this to a 10-year-old, supervised learning and unsupervised learning? And this one I thought was really, really interesting. I think this is helpful. With supervised learning, you can think of it like having a teacher who gives you lots of examples and tells you exactly what to do. And so for example, if you're learning how to play a card game, the teacher shows you many cards and tells you which ones are good and which ones are bad. And so you learn, if you were the AI, you would learn by these examples and understanding the rules. So to summarize, with supervised learning, and to think of an analogy, the teacher gives you examples and tells you what to do. The programmer gives the AI or the model examples and then what to do with those examples. Unsupervised learning, though, is much more open. And so the analogy looks like this. The teacher gives you a bunch of cards, but they don't tell you anything about the cards. You, as the model here, or as the person learning, you have to figure out the rules on your own by looking at patterns. So maybe you notice that some cards have similar colors and shapes, and maybe that's how you play the game. Or maybe it's about grouping cards together based on those similar colors or shapes. And so, again, using this analogy, if you are the AI, in this case, the teacher or the programmer gives you things to figure out on your own. They give you the data, but you figure it out on your own. Now, what's interesting is that generative AI actually uses both supervised and unsupervised learning. So when it comes to text generation, creating new text, there are models like GPT-4. So ChatGPT would be the platform for being the version of it. There's lots of data that it gets trained on, right? And this data helps chat models like ChatGPT create human-like text. And so it uses supervised learning by predicting the next word, and it uses unsupervised learning by understanding structure and context. Image generation, creating new images. There are models. There's a model called DALL-E, where they generate images from descriptions that are typed in. So they learn from labeled images and text pairs where they put the things together, which would be supervised learning. And then it looks also at large sets of data and creates some patterns there and unsupervised. And then we have music generation. So Google has a model called Music LM, and it can create new compositions by looking at patterns and melodies and harmonies and rhythms to create new pieces. Now, all of these models require you as the user to just use very natural human language to type in the prompts to generate either new text, new images, or new music. And the reason why it is so interesting and compelling as technology is because of the unsupervised learning. The fact that AI or generative AI can learn on its own and make sense of the data that's being inputted and doesn't require the close monitoring of a programmer, that is what makes it so impressive as a technology. And so for us, it's just important to know that these generative AIs create new things because of data that it has been given. So just as a point of interest, I thought I would share with you, now that you have that background, what GPT means. So when we hear the name ChatGPT, what does the GPT stand for? The G means generative, which means the model creates new text. P means it's pre-trained, that the model has been trained on lots of data before it creates what it does. And that T stands for transformer, and it's that architecture that allows it, part of the neural network, if you will, that allows it to understand and generate human-like text. So next time you see ChatGPT, you'll know what that GPT stands for. So I'm wondering at this point if there are any questions specifically about what we just discussed here in terms of supervised learning, unsupervised learning. I'm just wondering if there are any questions there.
No, nothing specific to that.
Okay, so what I'd like to do then is, again, I'm pretty sure we'll be able to get to questions, so everyone hold on. But what I'd like to do, if you'll humor me, is I'd like to actually play a game with you. And this game is actually, maybe I'll do this first. I'll show you the game. If you have a phone, you could go to this QR code and yeah, you go to that QR code and go to the game here called Quick Draw. It's a game by, hold on, I'll give you another second there. Covered it on you. It's a game by Google. And what it talks about is a neural network learning to recognize doodling. So we talked about neural networks. Remember, neural networks are a part of machine learning. It mimics the way the brain makes patterns. And so Google, back in, I believe it was 2016, they came out with this game. And let me show you how it works. Kalpana, can you confirm that you can see the game on my screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I don't know that the audio is going to be shown. You'll be able to hear the audio. However, when you're playing this game, the game actually speaks aloud. And you may, if you're doing it on your phone right now, you might hear that if you're playing the game. I don't think you'll hear it. However, you will see what it is saying, that it does provide captions. So this is the prompt. I have 20 seconds as the player to draw a necklace. And as I draw the necklace on my screen, I want you to note how long it takes for the game to recognize that that's what I'm drawing. Okay? Take a look. You can see on the bottom here, it's making guesses. See how? It was a bracelet. I was supposed to draw a bracelet, right? Okay, now take a look at this. So it didn't guess it. I can hear the audio here. It said, I'm stumped. I don't know what it is that you're drawing. Let's take a look at this. So it guessed it. I didn't even finish the doodle and it guessed it. Okay, so take a look here. Take a look at the bottom. Again, you'll see how quickly it is guessing and how quickly it gets it.
Oh, I know. It's ground.
Okay, I think this is my last one.
I see fish.
Oh,
Oh, it's
sorry, that was lobster. Now I have to do a lobster. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, so I played the game. There are 6. Oh, it was a necklace. That's why I didn't get it, but that's okay. I wanted to show you what happens when it doesn't guess it. But you can see here from the game that it was able to figure out 5 of the 6 things that I was drawing. What's interesting here is that I can see the data that it was using to figure out what it is that I was drawing. So if I click here and I go to data, I can select a drawing and I can see what were all of the doodles, the data set of doodles that it was using to figure out what it was that I was drawing. So take a look at here. Let me see if I can find crown. Oh, actually it was necklace. I wonder if I can find a necklace here. See it. Oh, let's go to, no, scorpion. I thought that was a lobster. Calpanda, do you see any of the drawings that I did? I'm trying to get to it.
I am looking. Let me see.
It's really funny. I played this game so many times. I don't know that I've ever had those drawings before.
I see star at the bottom, Moses. By
Thank
the way,
you.
you're a terrible drawer. I thought I was the worst. You're the worst.
Oh, yeah, I am the worst. You know, I actually taught kindergarten for a little bit, and I had my students actually laughed at me because my drawings were so, yeah. But you can see here all the different stars that have been created. You can actually even see when I click on it, what the strokes were that the person did. So take a look. Look, I can do that here. So not only is the final shape part of the data set, but the actual strokes that were taken to create the data, create the doodle were also part of the data set. Now, what's interesting is I can click on this and I can see that on January 28th, 2017, someone in the US drew this star. And here, if I click on this one, I can see reunion. I'm not sure where that is. In 2017, someone drew that star. I could go all the way down here. Let's see, where's this person from? Oh, US. I'm trying to find Latvia. Someone from Latvia drew that in 2017. Someone from Finland drew this one. And from Taiwan, someone drew this. Now, what's interesting here is I can look at all this data, I can look at this data set and I can actually flag this as inappropriate. In other words, I can look at this data set and I can say, yeah, this isn't appropriate. This probably isn't a star. And the game would then delete that from the data set and it wouldn't use it anymore. So that's an interesting point. So what I want to share with you is, I'm going to go back here to my presentation. So this game, it's an example of supervised learning. So it is training using a neural network, but it's been trained on this large data set of doodles, right? So things that are labeled like cat, house, or tree, the neural network, it learns to recognize these patterns that the drawings are based on the labeled examples. So when I, as the player, draw something, it compares what my drawing is to examples it's seen before and then tries to guess. And it can get stumped. Now, when I played it before, the one thing, Lindy, I'm laughing because, yeah, my drawings are terrible. But look here, I got basketball incorrect. And so when I've investigated, this is what it showed me. So it shows me what I drew, and the neural net didn't recognize it. And then it shows me what it thought it was that I was actually drawing. So it says, based on its data, what it comes closest to, it's a baseball, right? And then the second closest match would be what it understands to be a watermelon. And then the third closest match would be a cookie. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. Now, I shared with you the data set. And we talked about data that counts or data that doesn't count, right? And that as a player, I have the opportunity to decide and let the game know what isn't included. But it's through this that we can really begin to understand bias in a data set. Who gets to decide what's in part of a data set or not part of a data set? If all of our generative AI tools are pulling in all sorts of data and there's a flaw in the data sets, that can lead to a particular bias, right? And we already have quite a bit of examples where in real life where certain bodies aren't recognized by technology that is supposed to recognize people, right? And that's because the data set it's pulling from was not inclusive. And so it made wrong judgments, the technology did. In particular, what I'm thinking of right now are things like autonomous driving. So cars that drive on their own, not being to recognize actual people. And that's a problem. And that's because there's some bias in the data. So to further explain what I mean, take a look at this. What would you guess these are? Just by looking at these, what was the doodle here? And how can you tell that that's what they are? So I'm wondering, some of you might have kind of just shouted out, oh, those are, I'm hoping, toilets.
Yes.
Kalpana, what can I ask you, how can you tell that those are toilets?
They've got a toilet seat. They've got sort of the bowl for it. They've got a lid. They're a little taller to sit on.
Yeah. So the patterns that you have in your mind, about what toilets are reflected in these doodles, right? And so similarly, that is what is drawn. My question is do toilets look like this all over the world, though? So certainly when I look at these toilets, especially the ones that have a degree of elevation in them, they're familiar. They're toilets that I see, that I understand growing up here in Canada. This is what toilets look like. Now, what if your toilet looked like this? And it might be difficult to see here. This is a toilet in Japan. And it might be difficult to tell, but this actually is built into the ground. And so this requires the user to squat, essentially to squat when they're using the toilet. So my question is, what if someone's toilet looked like this? And would a doodle of this be eliminated from the data set? Is the next question. So the ways in which generative AI is creating what it does is based on the data that it has been fed, it has been trained on, whether it's supervised or whether it's unsupervised. If there are flaws in the data, then there's going to be flaws in the products that it creates. And so I think it's fairly I guess evidence. It's easily evident to see why there are some concerns with the way that generative AI creates what it does. So some other commonly cited considerations and concerns around generative AI that I certainly have come across in the readings that I have done is that generative AI is an unregulated technology. So there are not, we don't have what I'm going to call a constellation of frameworks and policies that would actually regulate this technology here in Canada, actually internationally as well. Another concern is that generative AI is owned by corporations. If I went back to Google, the quick draw, you'll see that it's owned by Google. It's Google's game. And all of that data belongs now to Google. My drawings belong to Google. Another consideration or concern is that people are just not sure how generative AI works. How does it make decisions? How does it create what it does? And that can be largely unknown. People don't know, and that is a consideration and concern. Another consideration and concern is that, you know, the potential threat that generative AI might have to the professionalism of teaching. That's a real thing. Like, what could it do? What we do as teachers? Then maybe there's a threat there. That's certainly something that I've read about. The financial costs of using generative AI. So someone had asked earlier about, you know, is Copilot available? It is, but if you want the most up-to-date versions of these models in which they're pulling from the most current data sets, you have to pay. It does require money. So in there's a concern. Another consideration or concern is that there isn't enough training or exploration for teachers, and we're going to talk specifically in the context here of education, of how Gen AI can actually be used in our practice. There is concern that, you know, students using generative AI might actually increase their dependence on it for learning and for them to complete schoolwork. These are concerns. Another commonly cited consideration or concern is that there isn't enough protection for teachers and students' personal data and privacy when they're using generative AI. And finally, the example I just shared with you, that the data itself that it's being trained on, what are the biases in these data sets? And can these biases actually negatively impact then student learning and well-being? If so, that's something we need to be aware of and be careful with. And so these are, I wanted to share these with you because what I suspect is that we all, if you were aware of the headlines in 2022, when ChatGPT was first released, there was lots of questions and concerns about it. It was impressive because of what I showed you at the beginning. I could type in a prompt using learning expectations, and it could generate like a lesson plan. It could even tell me about the misconceptions that students had. So from a teacher, that was impressive. For students, they could type in a prompt like an essay, right? An essay prompt, and they could generate that. And out of that, a lot of concerns came out. In particular, the conversation really centered around plagiarism. And so that was a concern that really came to the fore. What I'm going to suggest to you is that while those are valid concerns, I need you to note here that plagiarism isn't the most commonly cited consideration or concern in education. We have a much broader perspective on the things that the tools, the technology that we bring into our classrooms. We think more broadly about these issues, which is why there's all of these considerations and concerns, and it is more than just plagiarism. And so but all of it stems from understanding the data. Where does it come from? Who owns it? The fact that it is currently owned by corporations, you know, those are things that we need to be aware of and we need to make sure that those things inform our decision making in using generative AI. It's interesting. There is one platform called Magic School. Now, Magic School, my understanding is it's an AI platform, but it uses multiple models like ChatGPT. I think it uses Copilot even, maybe even Google's LLM, large language model, learning model. And Magic School can do what I showed you Copilot doing in terms of creating lessons. It can do unit plans. It can do a whole host of things that teachers could find use with. And what's interesting is in my exploration, I wanted to see, okay, well, how does this thing actually work? So I created an account, a free account. And just before I was able to get access to it, this is what I had to check off. I had to acknowledge. So Magic School offers these best practices for using AI. You'll note that some of these best practices are related to some of the concerns that I noted in the slide previous, but this is what I find interesting. It says, Magic School says rather, to make sure that we check for bias. So it acknowledges that sometimes the content is going to be biased or incorrect. So always double check before you share with students. So this is a teacher audience that it's speaking to here right now. It recommends something called the 80-20 approach, right? In other words, use Magic School or generative AI or AI for your initial work, but make sure you as the teacher, you add your final touch. So review for bias and accuracy, and then contextualize, which they're contextualize the content, and they're suggesting that's the last 20%. The third is your judgment matters. See AI generated content as your starting point, not the final version. Always adhere to your school's guidelines. And this is, again, for the teacher audience. And then finally, as teachers, protect privacy. Don't include personal student details like names or addresses. Magic School says that they strive to promptly remove any accidentally submitted information. So what I want to be clear about here is that OTF is not endorsing Magic School here. By me sharing this with you, we're not endorsing you to all get Magic School accounts and start using it. What I'm sharing, the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because AI-based companies understand some of the concerns that we have. And so they are on the forefront, they're front loading some advice to address some of these concerns. What I'm going to suggest to you is that it's still largely unregulated. And so these are, I think, some good starting points in terms of helping us inform how we use generative AI, but there are still some broader issues and concerns that we need to address. And we balance that with the potential value we see in using generative AI for some of the administrative tasks that we might be doing as teachers, or even using it to enhance student learning. I am not, I actually believe that teachers are creative enough to use generative AI in a way that enhances student learning. And it allows us to access student thinking in a way that might have been a little more difficult to access before. For example, I mean, I guess I'm thinking as a high school teacher, you know, if I was teaching, let's say grade 10 English, I might ask students to, because I'm looking at writing and I want students to get more proficient at writing. So I want them to think about, you know, voice when they're writing. I want them to think about organization, their word choice, all of those things. What I might do is I might tell all of them, okay, so students, you know, with AI that the school board has provided, that's something that we all need to be aware of. We want to make sure we're asking students to use AI platforms that our school boards have basically said you can use, right? If that were the case, I might say to my students, using the board-approved AI platforms, I'd like you to put in this prompt for an essay. And I'd like you to make sure that the prompt says that it needs to be written like a 10-year-old. You're in grade 10, but what the prompt is that I want you to have AI create this essay and write it like a 10-year-old. Then what I'd like you to do is copy that essay, and then you are going to put it into Google Docs or Microsoft Word, and then I'd like you to track changes, and I want you to edit now that essay and bump it up to a grade 10 level. So I want you to be able to describe for me the language that you're changing, why you're changing that language, is the rationale that they're using and the way they're defending their positions, is it robust enough? Maybe you need some better examples. Maybe you as a grade 10 student can come up with some better examples. So plug it in, but let me see you as a writer. So it is really, I think in that case, you get some really great insights into students and their thinking as writers, as opposed to just relying solely on the finished product to assess whether they're a good writer. I really get into their thinking as in the writing process. So yeah, that I'm wondering at this point, what are some insights or questions that you might have right now? Oh goodness, I'm looking at the time. I didn't realize I was talking so long. You know what, everyone, if I could maybe just wrap up with this last little bit, then maybe we can have some time to look at those final questions. So what I wanted to end with was thinking about where there might be some possible places for follow-up learning for you if you want to learn a little bit more. We saw this is a very much an introductory kind of session, really just trying to get our minds around how does generative AI work? How does it create what it creates? And out of that, what are the things that I need to be thinking about? But one place for you to do some follow-up learning is the Association for Media Literacy. I'm actually going to be doing a lot of this content with them for for another webinar at the beginning of December. So if you have some colleagues that you're like, oh, I think they might appreciate hearing some of this content, they weren't able to attend the OTF one, I'll be covering some of that, but we're actually also then going to delve into thinking about AI as media. And when we think critically about media, how can we apply that perspective onto AI? One of the really helpful podcasts that the AML did that was helpful to me was on using generative AI in the classroom. There were a couple of teachers that talked about, I think it was Heidi and Margie are the two teachers' names. They talked about how they were using generative AI in their classroom. And so I found that helpful in terms of just getting insight into how people might be using it in their classroom. There is a blog called Cult of Pedagogy, and at the beginning of every year, they release something called tech tools to try in that given year. If you were to do a search, you would see, I think we're going to put these links in the chat, but you would see that they recommend some AI platforms for teachers to try. What I will say is that a lot of these platforms, if your school board hasn't sanctioned or said these are permissible Gen AI platforms to use, I would be hesitant to use them with students, unless my school board has said, yes, you can use these with students. But I think it's important for us to also understand what is out there as well. So I want to end with some parting advice before we go into our final into some Q&As. And the big advice that I want to offer is knowing how Gen AI creates what it does, and understanding these considerations and concerns. I really want, I think it's important for us to remember to be judicious about how we use generative AI and how we will ask our students to use generative AI if that is permissible in our school board, right? We need to remember a few things. The first is that generative AI is a tool that we use, and it also uses us. Because each time I put in a prompt, I can't call it up right now. In that Copilot example, after it generates something for me, it actually asks me other questions. Do you want more information on this? It gives me 3 different prompts, and I can click on it, and then it can follow up and generate a new answer. But every time I do that, I'm actually giving the model additional information about what is of interest to me. So it is learning. Remember, unsupervised learning, it is learning by the prompts I'm actually putting in there and how I respond to the prompts. So yes, generative AI is a tool. Interestingly, it's the kind of technological tool that also uses us. The only way it functions is for us to continue putting data into it. And that's why we need to be judicious about how we use it. We need to be judicious about how we use generative AI and how our students use it, because it should always, like any other technology, should be used to advance and enrich student learning. If it cannot do that, I would recommend that maybe we not engage with it, right? If it doesn't advance and enrich student learning, let's pause and think carefully about how we use it. And we also want to be judicious about how we use it, how our students use it, because teaching is more than what generative AI can do. I think there is a message out there that it could take the place of teaching, of teachers. And what I'd like to suggest, and I think we all understand that teaching is more than just writing lesson plans. Teaching is, you can actually put student work in there and get generative AI to analyze it. And our work is more than even just assessing student work, right? Or evaluating student work. Teaching is so much more than that. And, you know, I think it's important for us to remember that. And when we make decisions in how we use generative AI, that we are not compromising what teaching actually is, right? So that's the parting advice that I wanted to leave you with, you know, out of this introduction, this kind of 101 to generative AI. I hope that you'll be able to you're leaving with a broader understanding of how generative AI works, how it is trained and to create what it does, and that you are also leaving remembering that you have a responsibility to be careful about how it's used and how our students are using it, especially when we introduce it in learning contexts. So with that, oh my goodness, there's only 2 minutes. I'm sorry. Kalpan, I see that Jason raised their hand. So Jason, maybe I can call on you if you had did you want to ask your question aloud?
Sure, yeah, I'm driving, so I'll ask it aloud.
Okay.
So I thought your idea about the English assignment was pretty good. Because the focus mainly in my school anyway is basically, you know, reading something, analyzing it, doing your standard 5-paragraph literary essay. Well, with AI nowadays, that's, you know, you're not going to get genuine work, right? So I'm just wondering what else you might have in your tool bag to do with English classes when it comes to analysis and interpretive writing for those students.
Yeah, so there is an approach that we use in language instruction where we do this kind of, it's called familiarize and analyze. So giving students an opportunity to look at text that AI provides, and then they apply the critical thinking to it. So there's this adage we have in language instruction where we teach students to read like writers and write like readers. So that's how actually I came up with that idea of analyzing the essay. How can I help students refine their reading by thinking like writers and then writing like readers? That's really where it came from. So Jason, I'd have to give a little more thought to how else, some other specific examples, but that reading like writers and writing like readers is actually the beginning point that I use in thinking about how I would get students to use AI with essay writing in particular. Sorry, go ahead.
Because I also teach ESL, right? And they use it like, you know, like candy, like kids eating candy. And
Right.
they're not learning much of the language itself, right? So, you know, I would like to counter with something that would be useful for those students in using AI. So that would be my other reason for asking the question, because I teach English and then I also teach ESL, and I find those harder to dissuade when it comes to using AI.
It's interesting, you know, when we think about English language learners, in learning a language is oral based to begin with, right? And so could AI, instead of looking at writing as something that kids hand in, could we use AI to then prompt some conversations? I wonder about it. But thank you for the question, Jason. Appreciate it. We are at time.
We
Kalpan, I
are.
don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
We are, and I think you've answered many of the questions. Several people did ask, are boards doing anything about it? And my suggestion in the chat was to contact their school board, their vice principal, or their local to seek out what the boards are doing, because this is very specific to school boards, but there's nothing coming from any of the unions at this point, or the Ontario College of Teachers, as Lindy had pointed out earlier.
Mhm. And the reason why I'm suggesting that school boards, and Lindy as well suggests that you go to your school boards, is because it is their responsibility to make sure that students and teachers are accessing technology that has gone through their checks, right? What I will say is that there still is a broader concern around the deregulation of this technology, right? Or that is, sorry, unregulated, not deregulation, it's unregulated. So that is still something that, we're very aware of, but school boards have the responsibility of deciding what technology students and teachers use in the board. So that's why I think the recommendation is check with your board.
Wonderful. Well, Moses, thank you so much for your time. Again, it was incredibly informative. The questions continue to happen, and I think your presentation has allowed participants today to seek out more answers as well. So thank you for your expertise and your time today. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you everyone for attending. Have a wonderful evening.
Take good care, everyone.